Hello, everybody. I'm going to go through module 2. Um, Again, I'll just kind of try and hit on the most important things so that you guys can more focus on the stuff that's the most important. Let's see, one thing that we talk about a little bit when we're understanding the research side of psychology is that we want individuals to know that we are not in the business of trying to explain past behavior. We are more focused on trying to predict future behavior. That's the goal of psychology, right? Trying to predict how is a human going to behave in some given situation. Okay. A lot of times people sit there and look back at things and say, oh, well, I could have told you that. I could have explained that. I could have told you that that was going to happen. And that's not what psychology does, right? We might see behavior happen in the real world, but trying to replicate it in a laboratory, trying to predict that that's the same way that humans are going to behave is a lot different. Okay. So this idea that we say, well, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that that would be the outcome. We call that hindsight bias. We know that people, when we look back at a past event and we're already aware of the outcome, then it's very easy to say, oh, I could have told you that was going to happen. But it's a whole other ball game to stand at one position in time and be able to say, yes, this is going to happen, or no, it's not. The one of a really good example is the Deepwater Horizon oil catastrophe that happened. The fire that happened is, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but a lot of people, they were building, they were cutting corners, they weren't being very safe, and so on. And the individuals were trying to say, like, look, you can't do this. You're gonna cause some problems, or you're cutting corners, and this is unsafe. But did we really know that that would lead to this outcome? Could we have predicted that this horrible fire was going to happen? Now, obviously, looking back on it, we can say, well, that was just silly for them to do that. That was horrible to cut corners. But would we have been able to predict that was exactly going to happen? So the hindsight bias is just something that we want to be careful of when we look into psychological research. People definitely tend to estimate how well they are going to perform at something. We definitely believe we have these great capabilities of all kinds of different things. So we want to be careful with that. Let's see, I'm going to move on. The other thing that we don't do very well is we don't like randomness in the world. Our brain can't really process random. So we always try and make sense of it. And sometimes we try and say that there's an explanation, there's a pattern, there is some reason for what it is that we're experiencing. And one of a good example is this octopus that for some reason was able to quote unquote predict who was going to win the World Cup. And he did this 8 out of, well, I don't know if it's a guy, it could be a boy or a girl, 8 out of 8 times. So they would give him 2 boxes of water. One had, each had a flag of the competing teams that were going to be in the World Cup. And then whoever the octopus chose, that team won the World Cup. And so some people were like, wow, this octopus, can predict who's going to win. And that's just kind of silly, right? I mean, we know that this octopus doesn't have insider knowledge about, the soccer teams and who's going to do well and who's not. So we want to be careful with things like this. It's, not that this octopus understands. It's probably more like the octopus in this case picks Germany. And so then that German team is just like, oh, this is it. We're going to win. The octopus picked us. And so they go into the game with a little bit more, I don't know, confidence and something to prove. And maybe the other team feels down about themselves and they're like, wow, the octopus didn't pick us. We're not going to win. And it's just kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy because they believe that they're not going to win. And so then they don't perform at the level that they're supposed to. Theories and research and how we go about conducting research in psychology. We follow the scientific method just like every other science out there. We have a theory, we put it into a testable prediction known as a hypothesis. We carefully try and define exactly what it is that we're doing and exactly what we're measuring and how we're measuring it so that other places around the world could hopefully replicate our findings. And if research around the world in all different parts of societies and all different types of individuals, hopefully we could get at some sort of explanation for what is human behavior. How are people going to behave in a certain situation? So a theory, right? We come up with some sort of a question. We try and define it in a way that we could test it and come up with a hypothesis. And then we conduct our research, right? And we come up with evidence that either confirms our theory and our hypothesis, or it tells us you got to go back and try again. What you hypothesized is not showing the evidence, or the evidence is not supporting the hypothesis. And maybe you need to come up with a better research study. Maybe you need to look at different individuals, or maybe try and figure out why it's not working the way you want to. So empirical evidence is the evidence that we gather out in the real world. This is actual real data. So, oops, oh, I didn't mean to do all that, sorry. So the scientific method, there's different ways that we can gather data and we can look at data. We can use descriptive methods, we can use correlational methods, or we can use experimentation, okay? So, descriptive methods is just very basic research. It's like averages, it's median income, it's very, very simple, basic data. You can't really, you don't know too much into what the data is telling you when we're just working with description. Here it's saying the methods used, but you use those methods in all types of data collection, not just descriptive. So a case study is like one individual or a small group of people that we need to study because they are unique in some way. They may have some super rare cancer, they may have some rare brain infection. So we have to study them to see what the effect is. And it would be unethical if we went out and, gave other people this cancer or this virus just so we could see what happens. An example that I'm thinking of, or that I talked about in one of my classes, was this patient HM. Patient HM had seizures, and they were able to pinpoint and kind of identify exactly in his brain where the seizures were originating. So they said, well, we're going to go in and kind of damage that part of the brain so that it could hopefully treat these horrible seizures. Well, when they went in and they did this surgery, they damaged patient HM's hippocampus. And when we get to module 3 and 4, we'll see that the hippocampus is crucial for forming memory. It's the process at which new information gets in and is laid down into long-term memory. So once this surgery happened on patient HM, he was no longer able to form new memories. he was forever stuck right before the surgery. He remembered everything up to the surgery, and then after that, nothing new got into his brain. He would not remember new people that he would meet. He didn't recognize himself in the mirror because he didn't recognize that he was getting older. You know, you talk to him and, you know, he could carry on a conversation for a little bit while you were in his working conscious. But as soon as his attention was diverted elsewhere, he would lose it, and he would look back at you and he would not remember who you were. This is damage to the hippocampus. You can see this in the movie 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler. Now, Drew Barrymore has, I don't know, something that I've never read about or heard about. She was able to have a memory for 24 hours, and then somehow at night it was reset. That doesn't really make sense. But if you remember in that movie, when she was in the hospital, there was a patient they called 10-second Tom. That is more accurate to what this affliction would be. And this was more accurate to what patient HM experienced. So obviously we have to use the data gathered from patient HM so that we could move forward and know, okay, that part of the brain is important for memory. And you know, while it's not necessarily generalizable to everybody that patient HM had his own personality and all of that stuff, we could use it fairly confidently to know, okay, this part of the brain is really important. A survey, I think, you know, we all know what a survey is. It's a pretty brief set of questions, and you can give it to a lot of people, you know, and that's what a survey is. And that's a good way to gather data. It's probably the #1 way that research is conducted worldwide. The naturalistic observation is where you go and you watch people in their natural environment. This is done a lot with children, obviously with animals, maybe with parent-child interactions, things like that. So the researcher doesn't intervene. They don't ask the person questions. They don't, you know, put themselves into the scenario too much. They just sit back and watch. And they take notes and they watch how the child is behaving, how the parent and child is behaving, and so on. Watching social media, this is a naturalistic observation, and obviously more up to date and things that could happen. So if your profiles are public, you may very well be in some data gathering for some researcher out there. So based on tweets, you know, throughout a certain time period, these researchers found that people tweet more positive messages. They use more positive words. Therefore, it could be gathered that maybe they're just more happy overall. On a late Saturday night, people are happier. And on a Tuesday evening or Tuesday afternoon, people are most unhappy. This is when people tweet more negative messages, more negative words, and so on. So you might look back on that and say, yeah, that's probably pretty true. I'm pretty, you know, miserable on a Tuesday afternoon, and I'm pretty darn happy on a Saturday night. So that's an interesting research that happened there. Correlation is a type of research where you sit back and watch things happen. You have two variables and you're trying to see how well one predicts the other, okay? And you use correlation because for some reason you're not able to conduct what we would call like a true experiment, okay? So if you're just sitting back and you're watching people behave and you're watching how things go down and you're taking notes and you want to see, does this predict this? we can have positive correlations and we can have negative correlations. And positive correlations have to do with if one variable goes up, the other variable goes up. If one variable goes down, the other variable goes down. So if I eat a lot of hamburgers, as you know, number of hamburgers increase, so does weight increases, right? The less hamburgers, the less weight. So that would be a positive correlation. A negative correlation has to do with an inverse relationship. So as one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. So time spent on the treadmill goes up, weight goes down, right? Less time on the treadmill, weight goes up. So they're inversely related to each other. Correlation, we cannot say that it causes. Okay, so we want to be real careful with that. Correlation does not prove causation. We cannot say, like in this example, that low self-esteem causes depression, because you could just as easily say that maybe depression causes low self-esteem, right? And then we could say that there could be an outside factor that is causing both low self-esteem and depression. So correlation, we have to be real careful with. We just say that the two go together. They are related in some way. They are linked to each other, okay? But they are not causing. Skip that part. All right, so an experiment is what is used to try and say this causes that, okay? And when a true experiment is conducted, that's the only time you get to say this causes that, okay? In an experiment, you have two main components that have to be satisfied. Okay, so the first one is you have to have two groups at least. Okay, you have to have at least two groups. You have an experimental group, which is the group that has something done to them. And then you have the control group. This is the group that nothing is done to them. Okay. And the most important thing about those two groups is the second component is the individuals have to be randomly assigned. Okay, you have to randomly assign the participants to either the experimental group or to the control group. Okay, once those two conditions are met, random assignment and a control group and an experiment group, that's when you have a true experiment, and that's when you can say this causes that, okay? Variables, you know, variables, we have an independent variable and we have a dependent variable. The independent variable is the thing that is manipulated, okay? It's, in this example, it's whether the baby is getting breast milk or the baby is getting formula. In this example, sorry, it's either depression or low self-esteem, if you want to think of it that way. So the independent variable is the factor that is controlled or manipulated, or you assign the people to the groups. It could be males versus females. It could be kids versus adults. It could be dogs versus cats. I don't know, Tylenol versus Advil, you know, I don't know, whatever it may be. So the groups or the factor that is manipulated. The dependent variable is the outcome. It's the thing that is measured. So in the breast milk formula example, it's intelligence. In you know, Tylenol versus Advil, it's maybe pain. In What were some of the other examples I gave? Men versus women. Maybe they were looking at who takes longer at an ATM. I don't know. It's the outcome. It's the thing that the researcher is largely most interested in. They want to see what is happening. And the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. So whatever's happening up here is going to cause or influence the outcome of this variable. Okay, a confound variable, or what we sometimes call an extraneous variable, is some sort of outside factor that we're not considering. It could be like in this example with breast milk and formula, a confound variable could just be genetics, right? Maybe the babies have genetics that are going to predispose them to have a high intelligence or not. And I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but that's what really intelligence is coming down to. It's more of a genetic factor compared to anything else. So these are just the different types of research. Again, we can have descriptive, correlational, experimental. What is their purpose, right? This is just to observe and kind of describe something. Correlation is used to predict an outcome, and experimental is used to infer causation, or to say a cause and effect. Ethics in psychological research, long gone are the days when you can have these really horrible, psychologically damaging studies. We will learn about those studies throughout this class, so we can't really do that stuff anymore. So nowadays in research, we have to have what we call informed consent. The person has to be participating voluntarily. You cannot be coerced into research. You can be paid, but you cannot be forced into research against your will. Deception, we're really not allowed to lie to you anymore unless it is imperative for the study. So you might be deceived a little bit at the beginning, but then at the end, you have to be told if you were deceived. They have to tell you that they were lying to you, and then they have to tell you why, and they have to then give you a way so that you can be so you can find out what was the research for, what were the results, and what was found. So we call that like a debrief, right? They have to tell you everything about the study. And of course, all information is always kept confidential. And that is it with chapter